My name is Ingrid Yates, and I'm 30 years old. 5 years since I'd spoken to my family, and there I was at my cousin's wedding, watching my mom lift a glass of red wine to her lips like a woman who'd never once lost sleep over me. She smiled the way she always smiled in a crowd, warm on the outside, cold underneath, and she asked me, in front of the whole table, whether I was still cleaning toilets for a living. People laughed. I set down my fork. But the wine glass in her hand wasn't the reason I'd flown in that weekend, and it wasn't the reason my heart was doing something complicated in my chest. The real reason is something I found 3 days later in a plain manila folder, and it's why you're here. Welcome back to Wise Family Revenge. This is where quiet women with long memories tell the stories nobody thought they'd survive, and the boundaries they finally drew to be free. If a family ever made you feel like the spare part, the extra place setting, the kid who could disappear, and nobody would rearrange the table, then you're among your people here. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back to that table. The wedding was beautiful. All string lights and white peonies, my cousin Cole grinning like a man who'd won the lottery. I hadn't planned to sit near my mother. These things arrange themselves against you. Marlene was 3 seats down, radiant in navy, holding court the way she always did, and when the conversation drifted toward me, she saw her opening. She swirled her wine, took a slow sip, and let the silence build so everyone would be listening. "So," she said, sweet as pie, "you still cleaning toilets for a living?" A couple of relatives chuckled into their drinks. My aunt looked at her plate. 5 years, and that was her opening line. Not, "I missed you," not, "You look well." A joke about scrubbing porcelain, aimed to land in front of witnesses. I felt the old heat climb my neck, the 12-year-old in me who'd once cried in a supply closet over a report card. But I'm not 12 anymore. I smiled, reached into my bag, and set my key fob on the white tablecloth, unhurried. "Not exactly," I said. "I mostly travel now. The company runs while I sleep." The table went quiet in a different way. Someone's fork stopped halfway up. My mother's smile stayed fixed, but her eyes went flat, the way they do when the script slips out of her hands. And here's the thing nobody tells you about a moment like that. It tasted good. It also tasted hollow. Both at once, like biting into fruit that looked perfect and had gone soft in the middle. I'd waited 5 years to say something like that to her face. I got my 2 seconds. And even as the table stared, some small, honest part of me whispered that this wasn't the win I'd built my whole life to collect. To explain the hollow part, I have to walk you back further than the wedding. Growing up, there were 2 daughters in the Yates house, and only one of us existed in color. My sister Whitney was the one they photographed. Whitney's spelling bee, Whitney's recital, Whitney's straight A's taped to the fridge like scripture. I was the other one, the kid whose birthday got moved because it landed near Whitney's game. The one who heard, "Your sister would never," so many times, it stopped being a sentence and became a kind of weather. I wasn't beaten. I was overlooked, which is quieter and lasts longer. By 17, I'd stopped raising my hand. I dropped out of community college halfway through, took a night shift cleaning office buildings because it paid that Friday, and I learned something on my knees at 2 in the morning with a mop and a floor buffer. Nobody was coming to notice me, so I stopped waiting to be noticed and started keeping score for myself. 5 years ago, at a Christmas dinner I can still smell, my mother introduced Whitney's promotion to the whole table, and then introduced me as still figuring it out. I was 25. I'd already signed my first real contract that month, though I didn't say so. I drove back to my apartment that night, sat in the dark, and made a decision that felt less like anger and more like exhaustion. I stopped calling. I told myself the leaving had healed it. That distance was the same thing as peace, that I'd carried the wound out the door and left it in that dining room. For 5 years I believed it. The next hour at that wedding proved me wrong. After the toast, I did the thing you do at weddings. I worked the room, hugged people I half remembered, admired a lot of centerpieces, and slowly I understood that a story about me had been living in this family the whole time I was gone, and I'd never been consulted for the script. My Aunt Deborah squeezed my arm and said, with real pity, "We were all so sad when you cut everyone off." My uncle nodded along. Cut everyone off. That's how it had traveled. Not Ingrid stopped calling after years of being made small. Not something broke and nobody fixed it. Just a clean, tidy verb with me as the subject and the whole family as my victims. I said something polite. I always say something polite. But I was doing the math in my head, the way I do with a messy account, watching numbers that don't add up. Somebody had been telling this version for 5 years, consistently, to everyone, and consistency like that doesn't happen by accident, it gets maintained. Another cousin drifted over and mentioned, half laughing, that they'd heard I ran off to chase some cleaning thing. Ran off. Chase. Every word placed me as the flighty one, the unstable one, the one you couldn't count on. I smiled and refilled my water and felt the ground tilt a few degrees. Because a story this uniform, repeated this faithfully, isn't gossip. It's infrastructure. Someone had built it on purpose and they'd built it to hold weight. I just didn't know yet what they were planning to hang from it. The reception moved into toasts, and Cole, sweet Cole, raised his glass and talked about our grandmother. Eleanor Voss had died 8 months earlier while I was gone, and I hadn't known until a cousin mentioned it in passing that afternoon like it was old weather. That's a grief I'll come back to. Cole's voice cracked when he said, "Grandma would have loved having us all out at the lake house today. That was her happy place." Around the room, people nodded and dabbed their eyes. The lake house, 2 acres on a quiet shoreline, a green dock, a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and lake water. As kids, Whitney and I spent every July there. Grandma Eleanor used to stand on that dock with a hand on each of our shoulders and say it belonged to all her grandchildren, that it would always be a place we could come back to. I was smiling at the memory when a woman beside me, a family friend I barely knew, leaned in and said, "It's Whitney's now, you know. She got the lake house." She said it like a nice piece of news, like something settled and pleasant. I kept my face still, a skill I've spent 30 years perfecting. But inside, something snagged hard. Whitney's now. Not the grandchildren's. Not held for the family. Whitney's. Singular. Deeded and done. I looked across the room at my sister laughing with her husband, and then at my mother, glowing at the head of a table she'd arranged, and a small cold question opened up in me. How exactly had a house that belonged to all of us become the property of just one? I stepped outside to breathe. The parking lot was cooling under a lavender sky, and I was standing between 2 SUVs trying to talk myself down when my Aunt Paula found me. Paula is my mother's younger sister, and she's always been the soft one, the aunt who slipped you a 20 and never mentioned it. She looked around before she spoke, which told me plenty. "Ingrid, honey," she said low, "I've wanted to reach you for a while now. There are things about your grandmother's trust you should know." My grandmother's trust. The phrase turned the evening from painful to procedural. I asked her what she meant. Paula pressed her lips together and her eyes went shiny and she shook her head. "Not here," she said. "Not tonight, with all of them inside. But you need to look at what happened before Mama passed. You need to ask for the documents. Promise me you'll ask." She pushed a slip of paper into my hand, her cell number written in the careful cursive of a woman who still writes thank you cards. Then she squeezed my wrist and went back inside before anyone noticed we'd been talking. I stood in the parking lot holding that little scrap of paper, the wedding music thumping faintly through the wall, and I felt the whole shape of the weekend change under me. I'd flown in expecting one bad dinner and a polite exit. Instead, my aunt had just handed me a thread and begged me to pull it. What happened before Mama passed? I didn't sleep much that night, and in the morning I started asking. Back at the hotel, before I could think about grandmother's trusts, my phone lit up with the ordinary noise of my actual life. My operations manager, Dev, needed a signature on a renewal. A regional client wanted to add 2 buildings to their contract. A new crew lead in Phoenix had a scheduling question the software should have answered, so I made a note to fix the software. This is the part my mother's little joke gets wrong. Yes, I started with a mop. At 22, I was cleaning offices at night, and at 24, I stopped cleaning them myself and started staffing the crews who did. By 30, I owned a commercial facilities company with recurring contracts across 4 states, a scheduling platform other operators pay to license, and a general manager who runs the day-to-day so I can be on a plane when I need to be. I don't say any of that at parties. I don't wear it. But it means that when Marlene asked if I was still cleaning toilets, the honest answer was that I'd built the thing that cleans 1,000 of them and bills for it monthly, whether I'm awake or asleep. I sat on the hotel bed and turned my key fob over in my hand, this dumb little piece of black plastic that had made a table go quiet. And I realized the money was never going to be the point of whatever Paula wanted me to find. I don't need my family's money. I've got my own. Which meant that if my grandmother's trust had been rearranged to write me out, it wasn't about the dollars at all. It was about the record. About who this family was willing to say I was. The next morning, I called my attorney. Not a family lawyer, not somebody with a stake in keeping the peace at Thanksgiving, but the estate attorney my business already retained, a calm woman named Renata who bills like a surgeon and thinks like one too. I told her what Paula had said and what I'd overheard about the lake house. Renata asked me 2 questions. Was I ever named a beneficiary of my grandmother's trust? And had I received any notice when my grandmother died? The first answer was yes, or at least I'd always understood so. Grandma Eleanor had told Whitney and me, plainly, more than once, that her trust split everything between her grandchildren and kept the lake house for both of us. The second answer was no. Nobody had told me she'd died. Nobody had sent me a single page. Renata went quiet for a second, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed, sharpened. If you were a named beneficiary, she said, you had a legal right to notice and to an accounting when she passed. If you got neither, that's a problem for whoever was running that trust. She told me she'd send a formal request that afternoon for the complete trust file, the original document, and anything that came after. Then she said the word that put a stone in my stomach. Because if there's an amended trust you were never told about, Ingrid, we need to see exactly what it changed, and exactly when. Amended. I hadn't said anything about an amendment, but the moment she said it, some part of me already knew that's what I was going to find. That afternoon, I sat in a hotel room in a town I'd left 5 years ago and made myself say the stakes out loud, because naming a thing makes it real and I've never been able to fight what I won't name. If there was an amendment, and if it held, then somewhere in a lawyer's file was an official document, signed and notarized, that erased me from my grandmother's wishes. Not a slight at a dinner table that I could walk away from. A record. Paper that would outlive all of us, that my niece could pull from a drawer in 40 years and read as fact. Ingrid was written out, so Ingrid must not have counted. And worse than my own erasure was the other half of it. If someone had rewritten Eleanor's trust, then Eleanor's real wishes, the ones she'd spoken with her hand on my shoulder on that dock, had been buried and might stay buried forever unless somebody dug them up. That was the part I couldn't let go. I could shrug off the money. I could not shrug off the idea of my grandmother's last true intentions being quietly deleted while everyone smiled at a wedding. So I made a decision that surprised me. There was a memorial brunch for Grandma Eleanor the following weekend, the whole extended family gathering at Paula's to scatter some of her ashes at the lake. I'd planned to be long gone by then, back on a plane, back to my clean and orderly life. Instead, I extended my hotel reservation, texted Dev that I'd be working remote for a week, and stayed. If the truth was in this town, I was going to be in this town too. I decided I couldn't wait a week to look my sister in the eye, so I asked Whitney for coffee, and to my surprise, she said yes. We met at a diner off Route 9, the kind with laminated menus and bottomless burnt coffee, neutral ground. Whitney looked older than the woman in my head, tired around the eyes, 2 kids worth of tired. For a minute we were almost human with each other. Then I mentioned Grandma and the lake house, and something in her went to armor. You don't get to do this, she said, stirring a coffee she wasn't drinking. You left. You cut everyone off. You disappeared for 5 years and now you show up and you want to, what, audit us? There it was again. That verb. You left. You cut everyone off. She said it like a line she'd been handed and made herself believe. But underneath the armor, I saw something I didn't expect. A flicker. There and gone. When I said the words, Grandma's trust, Whitney flinched. Not a big flinch. A small one at the corner of her mouth, the kind you catch only if you've spent your childhood reading A Room for Early Warnings. She covered it fast, waved for the check, said she had to get Nora to practice. But she didn't quite meet my eyes when she stood, and she left too much cash on the table, the way people do when they're trying to get out of a room. Driving back to the hotel, I kept seeing that flinch. Whitney knew something. Whatever had happened to Grandma's trust, my sister wasn't an innocent bystander, and she wasn't a comfortable one either. Something was eating her. I filed it away and kept going. Aunt Paula invited me over the next day, and I walked into a living room full of my mother's generation, the great aunts and the family friends, a whole choir of women in cardigans drinking tea. I hadn't expected an audience, but I sat and I listened, and I learned how the story about me sounded when it was sung in the original key. One great aunt patted my knee and said, not unkindly, "It's just so hard, dear, when a young woman won't settle down." Another added, "Eleanor worried about you. A girl out there alone, no husband, running around with a cleaning business. Where's the stability in that?" A third nodded and delivered the verdict like a benediction. "You can't hand a girl like that the family's things. She'd have nothing to steady it. Whitney has a home, a husband, children. It only made sense." It only made sense. I sat there with my tea and understood I was hearing the closing argument in a trial I'd never been invited to attend. In their world, a woman's worth came bundled with a man, a mortgage, a minivan. A single woman who built her own thing wasn't independent. She was unstable. And under all the gentle language, someone had used exactly that logic to justify something. My mother sat across the room, hands folded, wearing the modest little smile of a woman being praised for a hard, selfless decision. She didn't defend the story. She didn't need to. She'd written it, and now the whole choir was singing it back to her. For my own good, for the family's good. I'd heard that music my whole life. I just hadn't known until that living room that they'd finally set it to a legal document. Renata's email came through while I was standing in the hotel lobby that evening, waiting for the elevator. Subject line, flat as a headstone. Voss Trust. Original and amendment, per your request. My thumb hovered. I could have gone up to my room, poured a glass of water, sat down like a sensible person. Instead, I opened it right there under the lobby chandelier, because 5 years of not knowing had made patience feel like a luxury I couldn't afford one more minute of. 2 documents. The first was the original Eleanor Voss Revocable Living Trust, dated years back, when Grandma was sharp and driving and still beating me at cards. The second was labeled First Amendment to the Eleanor Voss Revocable Living Trust, dated a little under 2 years ago. My eyes went to the amendment first, the way you press on a bruise. It was only a few pages. Legal language, cold and clipped, the kind that's designed to feel inevitable. I got through the opening paragraph, and my hand actually tightened on the phone. There was my name, printed in a trust I'd grown up being promised a place in, and next to it a sentence I'd never in my life expected to read about myself. I stopped in the middle of the lobby, a woman in a business coat frozen under a chandelier, strangers stepping around me. I'd spent all week bracing for this, and it still knocked the wind out of me. I opened it standing up. I wish I'd been sitting down. And I made myself do the one thing my whole life had trained me to do when a wound wanted to become panic. I got quiet, went upstairs, spread both documents on the desk, and started to read them like the puzzle they were. Before I tell you what the amendment said, I have to tell you about the card, because the card is the reason none of it added up. When I'd left Paula's house the day before, she'd pressed a small box into my hands, embarrassed, saying only, "These are yours." She'd have wanted you to have them. Inside were odds and ends of my grandmother's, a pressed flower, a thimble, and an envelope with my name on it in Eleanor's handwriting. It was a birthday card. My grandmother had sent it to Paula to hold, because by then she didn't have my address, because I'd cut off the channels that would have carried it to me. The date on the postmark stopped my breath. She'd written it a little over a year and a half ago. Right in the window, everything else had happened. The handwriting wobbled, the letters of a woman whose hands had started to betray her, but the words were steady. Happy birthday, my Ingrid. I don't always find the right day anymore, but I never lose you. The lake is yours too, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you different. Love always, Grandma. I read it 4 times. The lake is yours too, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you different. She'd written that in the same season someone was busy erasing me from her trust. Whatever her mind was doing to her by then, whatever fog was rolling in, she had not forgotten me. And she had not changed her heart about that shoreline. She'd reached across her own failing memory to tell me I still belonged. I set the card against the lamp on the desk where I could see it, this small wobbling piece of proof, and I turned back to the cold pages of the amendment. 2 documents from the same few months, telling 2 completely different stories. One of them was a lie. I intended to find out which and who wrote it. I want to be honest with you about something, because this is the part that took me years to see. That night, with the card propped against the lamp and the amendment lying there like a dead thing, I picked up my key fob again. The same one I'd set on the wedding tablecloth to make my mother's smile go flat. And I finally understood why that moment had tasted hollow, even while it tasted sweet. I had spent 8 years building a company. I'd staffed crews, written software, signed contracts across 4 states, and somewhere in the private engine room of my heart, a piece of all that effort had a name on it, and the name was Marlene. I'd built it so she would have to look, so the table would go quiet, so the woman who introduced me as still figuring it out would one day choke on a mouthful of wine. And I'd gotten my moment at the wedding, my perfect little 2 seconds, and it had left me emptier than before, because a trophy you win to shove in someone's face isn't yours. It's still theirs. It's still about them. I sat on that hotel bed and said the truest sentence I knew to myself. I built an empire to make them look. The freedom was in not needing them to. And here's the thing. I didn't believe it yet. I could say the words. I could see the shape of the truth they pointed at. But I was still the woman who'd flown a key fob across a dinner table for the pleasure of a flinch. Still the woman staying an extra week partly to win. Knowing your wound and healing it are different countries, and I was standing at a border I hadn't crossed. The card said I belonged. My whole life had trained me to prove it. I didn't know yet that those were opposite instructions. So let me tell you what the amendment actually did, now that you understand what it was up against. The original trust was clean and even-handed, the document of a woman who loved 2 granddaughters the same. It split the residual estate equally between Whitney and me, roughly $500,000 each once the accounts and the smaller property were counted, and it held the lake house jointly for both of us, to be kept in the family. That was Grandma. The amendment took a blade to all of it. It removed me entirely. It redirected my half of the residual to Whitney, and it carved out a chunk, framed as reimbursement for caregiving expenses, to my mother personally. It deeded the lake house to Whitney alone, and it justified the whole thing with one sentence, a sentence I've read so many times it's scratched into me. My granddaughter Ingrid, having estranged herself from the family, is intentionally omitted from this trust and shall take nothing. Intentionally omitted. Shall take nothing. There was the infrastructure I'd felt at the wedding, the story that had been maintained for 5 years, and here was the load it had been built to bear. Every she cut everyone off, every she ran off to chase a cleaning thing, every pitying pat on my arm, all of it had been quietly pouring the foundation under that one sentence. My mother needed me to be the unstable daughter who abandoned her family, because you can't write a beloved granddaughter out of a trust, but you can write out a cautionary tale. So, you still cleaning toilets for a living? That wasn't a joke at a wedding. It was maintenance. She was keeping the story oiled in front of witnesses, the same story that let her put "shall take nothing" beside my name. I understood that, sitting at the desk. And then I noticed the date on the signature page, and the whole thing cracked wide open. If you've ever read your own name written out of something and felt the floor tilt under you, then you already know why I didn't scream that night. I got quiet. Quiet is where I do my best work. Stay with me, because the thing I found on that signature page is where this whole story turns, and what I chose to do with it is not what I planned. And subscribe, because women like us have to stick together. The signature page listed a date, and the date wouldn't sit still in my head. I'm the kind of person who remembers numbers because numbers don't lie to me the way people do, and something about that date snagged against another number I'd heard that week. I pulled out the slip of paper with Paula's cursive on it and called her. I asked her carefully if she remembered when Grandma had been in the hospital near the end. Paula didn't even have to think. "Which time?" she said. "There were a few, but the bad one, the long one, was that spring. She was in for almost 3 weeks. That's when they told us it wasn't just the falls. It was her mind slipping. The dementia. She didn't know me half the time. She called me by her sister's name. That spring." I looked at the signature date on the amendment. Then I looked at the window Paula had just described. They were the same window. The document that erased me, the document that redirected $500,000 and a lake house, the document that declared my grandmother's clear and settled intention, had been signed while she was in a hospital bed not knowing her own daughter's face. I sat very still. Because a trust amendment isn't just a wish, it's a legal act that requires the person signing to know what they're doing, to understand what they own and who they're giving it to. You cannot competently disinherit a granddaughter you can't reliably identify. If that signature landed in the middle of those 3 weeks, the amendment wasn't just cruel. It was potentially void, top to bottom. I thanked Paula and hung up, my heart going fast and cold and clear. I needed to know the exact day of that signature against the exact days of that hospital stay, and I knew, now, exactly where to look. I've built a company by refusing to guess when I can know, so I didn't try to be my own investigator. I hired one. Renata connected me with a forensic accountant named Denise Alvarez, a woman who spends her days reading other people's money the way a doctor reads an X-ray. As a former beneficiary of the original trust, I had a legal right to demand a full accounting. Every dollar in and out during the years Marlene had been managing my grandmother's affairs. Renata sent the demand. The trustee, my mother, had to produce the records. And she did. Because refusing would have looked worse than complying. Denise called me 2 days later with the flat, careful voice of someone who's found exactly what she went looking for. "I want to walk you through the pattern," she said, "because it's a pattern, not an accident." Over the last 2 years of Eleanor's life, there had been a steady drip of transfers out of my grandmother's accounts and into my mother's, every few weeks. Always labeled with the same vague word: care, groceries, prescriptions, a caregiver's time, all the ordinary costs of helping an aging parent, except the numbers didn't match ordinary costs. They were too round, too regular, too large, and they ramped up sharply right as Eleanor's mind was going. "When someone's cognitive decline accelerates," Denise said, "and the transfers to the caregiver accelerate on the same curve, that's not coincidence. That's opportunity meeting access." She'd put it all in a clean summary, dates and amounts, a line going up and up. It wasn't proof of a crime by itself. But laid next to a hospital stay and a signature, it stopped being a sad family story and started being something with a name. Elder financial abuse. I wrote the words down and looked at them for a long time. I went back to the amendment to reread the signature page with Denise's summary fresh in my mind, and that's when I saw the name I'd skimmed past the first time, down in the witness block. Whitney Yates Coombs. My sister had signed the amendment as a witness. She'd stood in a room, or been handed a pen somewhere, and put her name on the document that erased me and handed her my half and the lake house. I sat back in the desk chair and felt the ground shift again, this time in a direction I hated. Because a witness to an amendment procured through undue influence isn't just a bystander. If this ever became a legal fight, or worse, a criminal one, my sister's signature put her inside the frame, not outside it. That flinch at the diner made a new and terrible sense. Whitney wasn't nervous because she'd heard a rumor. She was nervous because her own name was on the paper. And here's where the weight of the whole thing finally landed on me, sitting alone in that hotel room. I wasn't a victim anymore, holding a card and a grudge. I was a woman with a forensic accounting, a hospital timeline, and a witness signature, which meant I was a woman who could pick up a phone and put her mother in front of a criminal investigator and drag her sister in right behind her. My name was written out of a trust, but my sister's name was written into a crime, which meant I could take her down too. The question, the one that started keeping me up at night, wasn't whether I could. It was whether I wanted to, and what it would cost me to find out. There was one more thread to pull, and it was the lawyer. Every legal document has an author, and I wanted to know who had drafted the sentence that said I shall take nothing. The amendment named the attorney who'd prepared it, a man called Gerald Whitfield, and the name meant nothing to me until I ran it and made 2 phone calls. Whitfield had never been my grandmother's lawyer. Eleanor had used the same small firm downtown for 30 years, a nice old man named Prewitt who'd done her original trust and her taxes, and probably her Christmas cards. Whitfield was somebody else entirely. And when I asked Paula, careful again, whether she knew a Gerald Whitfield, she made a small sound of recognition. Gerald. That's Marlene's friend. They know each other from the club. They've been friendly for years. Why? Marlene's friend. Not Eleanor's lawyer of 30 years, sharp and independent and loyal to the woman who'd hired him. My mother's golf club acquaintance, brought in to draft the document that happened to enrich my mother. In the world of these cases, that has a name too. It's called procurement, when the person who benefits from a change is the one who arranges it, who picks the lawyer, who sets up the signing. It's one of the brightest red flags a court looks for. Eleanor didn't go find Whitfield. Whitfield was Marlene's. Every piece was clicking into the same slot now, and they all pointed the same direction. An isolated woman losing her mind, a caregiver daughter with total access, a friendly lawyer with no loyalty to the client, a signature in the middle of a 3-week hospital stay, a steady drain of money labeled care, and one granddaughter, conveniently, already painted as the one who didn't count. I could have hardened completely right then. It would have been easy, and I'd have been within my rights. But Paula, maybe sensing where I was headed, told me something over the phone that complicated the anger, the way the truth usually does. You should know where your mother comes from, she said, before you decide what she is. She told me about their childhood, hers and Marlene's. Their mother, my grandmother Eleanor, had not always been the woman who stood on a dock with a hand on each granddaughter's shoulder. Back then, Eleanor had a son, my mother's older brother, Danny, and Danny was the son the whole house rotated around. The boy got the college money, Paula said. The boy got the car. Marlene got told to find a good husband and be grateful. When our father died, there wasn't much, and what there was went to Danny, because that's how it was done then. Marlene was 19, and she watched it happen, and something in her decided, right there, that a woman who doesn't lock down security ends up with nothing. Danny had died young, and Eleanor had softened with age into the grandmother I knew, generous and even-handed, as if she were trying to unlive her own choices through her grandchildren. But Marlene had never gotten that softer version as a girl. She'd gotten the scarcity, the terror of being the daughter who's told to depend on a man because she'll never build her own wall against the cold. I sat with that a long time. It didn't excuse a single thing. A woman erased her own daughter and looted her dying mother, and no childhood wound makes that acceptable. But I understood finally that my mother wasn't a cartoon villain hoarding gold. She was a frightened girl from 1970-something, still running from a poverty of the heart that her own mother had handed her, and passing the exact same fear down to me with interest. She was enforcing the law that had crushed her. Understanding my mother didn't change what I had to do next, which was nail the one fact that turned suspicion into certainty. I needed the medical records, the exact dates of that hospital stay against the exact date on the signature page. Here's where it mattered that I hadn't done any of this in the shadows. Paula, it turned out, wasn't just the soft aunt. In the original trust, Eleanor had named Paula as a successor and co-agent, someone with legal authority over her care, an authority Marlene had mostly steamrolled but never erased. That gave Paula a lawful right to request Eleanor's medical records, and Paula, shaking a little at what she was doing to her own sister, requested them. They came in a thick envelope, and Renata and I went through them together on a video call. The admission date, the discharge date. 3 weeks in the spring, exactly as Paula remembered. And in the daily nursing notes, over and over, the phrases that decided everything. Patient confused. Not oriented to time or place. Unable to recall family members. Sedated for agitation. I found the day that matched the signature on the amendment. On that day, the nurse's note read that my grandmother had been disoriented in the morning, had not known where she was, and had been given medication that afternoon to keep her calm. And somewhere in that same day, according to the document, Eleanor Voss had supposedly reviewed a multi-page legal instrument, understood that she was disinheriting one granddaughter and enriching another, understood she was handing her caregiver daughter a reimbursement, and signed it all with a sound and settled mind. It was not possible. It was documented, in a hospital's own hand, that it was not possible. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet, and I knew I had crossed out of the country of grief and into the country of proof. There was no unknowing this now. Renata laid it out for me plainly on that call, in the careful way lawyers do when they want you to understand the size of the thing in your hands. You have two separate weapons here, Ingrid, and you need to see them as separate, she said. One is civil. With this timeline and this accounting, we can almost certainly void the amendment. A signature made during documented incapacity doesn't hold. The original trust snaps back into force. You're a full beneficiary again. The lake house goes back to being held for both grandchildren. That part is close to a sure thing. I asked her about the other weapon. She was quiet for a second. The other is criminal, she said. What your mother did, isolating your grandmother, procuring the amendment through her own lawyer, moving that money to herself while your grandmother was declining, that fits the definition of elder financial abuse. If we hand this package to the county's elder abuse unit, they will very likely open a case. Your mother could be prosecuted. And your sister's signature as a witness means she'd be pulled in too, at minimum for questioning. Possibly worse. So there it was, spread on the table in front of me, complete. I could pick up a phone and, with the evidence I already had, set in motion the total ruin of my mother. Prison, maybe. Public disgrace, certainly. And my sister dragged through the wreckage beside her, my niece watching her mother answer a detective's questions. I had the power to do to them what they'd spent a lifetime doing to me, only bigger, only real, only permanent. I sat with that power all night, in the dark, in a hotel in the town I'd fled, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt the weight of it, the terrible, fully loaded weight of it. I could send my own mother to prison with a signature of my own. And for the first time, the question wasn't whether I could win. It was who I wanted to be when I did. Renata called it, without any drama, the fork in the road, and she was too good at her job to push me down either path. You have two roads, she said, and I'll walk either one with you, but you have to choose, because they go opposite directions. The first road she called the maximum. File the civil action and simultaneously hand the whole package to the elder abuse unit and let the family read about it. Marlene faces charges. Whitney faces exposure. I get every dollar of my restored share. I get the lake house, and I get the deep, public, permanent vindication of watching the woman who wrote "shall take nothing" beside my name lose everything in front of the exact same relatives who sang her story. It was the road that answered 5 years of "she cut everyone off" with a headline. The second road she called the settlement. Void the amendment through a documented agreement. Restore the original trust. Correct the money. But keep it out of the criminal system. Give my mother a private off-ramp instead of a public execution. Less spectacle, less blood. The truth restored, but no ruin. Most people in your position, Renata said gently, want the first road. And most of them are entitled to it. I'm not going to tell you it would be wrong. I told her I needed the weekend to decide, which was true, because the memorial brunch was that weekend, and I knew, without quite admitting it, that whatever I chose would happen there, in front of all of them. Two roads. One of them gave me everything my want had screamed for since I was 12 years old. I hung up not knowing which one I'd take, and honestly, a little afraid of the answer. I spent that night doing the hardest arithmetic of my life, which was figuring out what I actually wanted, underneath what I thought I wanted. The money was easy to cross off. I make more in a good quarter than my restored share was worth. I didn't need a dime of Eleanor's estate to be safe, and pretending otherwise would have been a lie. So it wasn't the money. Was it justice? That sounded noble, and I told myself that for an hour, until I got honest. What I wanted, when I imagined the maximum road, wasn't a fair outcome. It was the picture. My mother's face when the detective arrived. The relatives' faces when they finally understood they'd been singing a liar's song. Whitney's face. I wanted them to see. I wanted every person who'd ever introduced me as still figuring it out to be forced at last to look at the truth of who was the liar and who was the wronged. And sitting there, I heard my own words from a few nights before. The ones I could say, but couldn't yet live. I built an empire to make them look. The freedom was in not needing them to. That was the whole trap. Laid bare. The maximum road wasn't justice. It was the biggest, most expensive version of flying a key fob across a dinner table. It was me, still 12, still standing in the doorway of that dining room, waiting for them to finally see my worth and confirm it. And I understood, with a kind of grief, that if I took the maximum road to make them see, then no matter how completely I won, I'd still be handing them the verdict. I'd still be asking. And a woman who's still asking has never actually left. The day before the brunch, I asked Whitney to meet me one more time. And this time, I didn't come to spar. I came to show her. We sat in my rental car outside her house, and I put the folder on the console between us. Open. Everything in it. The amendment. The hospital notes. Denise's summary. The card. No ambush. No speech. Just the truth. Laid where she could read it. I watched my sister's face come apart in slow motion. She got to the nursing note that said "not oriented" beside the signature date, and her hand went to her mouth. She told me Grandma wanted this, Whitney said, and her voice was a child's voice. Mom sat me down and said Grandma had decided that you'd made your choice by leaving, and she just needed a witness so it would be legal. I didn't read it, Ingrid. I swear to God I didn't read it. I just signed where she pointed. I believed her. That was the ugliest part. She'd been used exactly the way I'd been erased, both of us arranged like furniture by the same hand. Then Whitney said the thing that undid me. She always needed you to be small, she whispered. My whole life. Every time you did something good, she got, I don't know, nervous, like your success was a threat to the story. That toilet joke at the wedding? She practiced that, Ingrid. I heard her practice it in the car. She practiced it in the car. My mother had rehearsed the line about cleaning toilets, tuned it for maximum landing, because keeping me small in front of witnesses wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was upkeep. It was protecting the load-bearing lie. Whitney was crying now, really crying, and she asked me the question that would decide everything. What are you going to do to her? To us? I looked at my sister, and I honestly didn't know yet, but I was getting close. Driving away from Whitney's house, I finally let myself count the true cost of each road, all the way to the bottom, no flinching. If I took the maximum road, here's what it bought and what it burned. It bought me the picture I craved, the detective, the disgrace, the faces, and it burned my mother into a defendant, an old frightened woman in a courtroom, which, God help me, some part of me still wanted. But it also burned Whitney, who'd been handed a pen by the same liar who handed me a lifetime of small. It burned my niece Nora, 12 years old, who'd grow up knowing her grandmother went to jail and her mother helped. It burned the memorial itself, turned the scattering of Eleanor's ashes into the backdrop of a family's public execution, dragged my grandmother's dignity through a criminal file. And here's the piece I couldn't get around. the piece that finally turned me. Taking the maximum road meant winning my mother's game by playing my mother's game. She won through spectacle, through controlling the story in front of an audience, through the public humiliation of the person she wanted to keep small. If I stood up at that brunch and destroyed her in front of everyone, I wasn't escaping her world. I was proving I'd learned it. I'd just be the better player at the exact cruelty I claimed to hate. The other road, the settlement, cost me something too, and I want to be honest that it cost me more, not less. It cost me the picture. It cost me the sweet, roaring vindication I'd been owed since I was a child. And it cost me the very last thread I hadn't known I was still holding. The secret hope that if I just handled this right, my mother might finally turn and see me and choose me and love me. The settlement meant giving that up. Forever. There was no version of the gentle road that ended with her arms open. I couldn't decide, so I went back to the card. It was still propped against the hotel lamp where I'd left it, my grandmother's wobbling hand catching the light. The lake is yours too, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you different. I'd been reading that card as a weapon, one more exhibit in the folder, proof that Eleanor's true wishes contradicted the amendment. But that night I read it as what it actually was. A love letter from a dying woman who, even as her own mind dissolved, reached past the fog to make sure I knew I belonged. She hadn't written it to help me win a lawsuit. She'd written it to reach me. And I realized that the whole time I'd been sharpening this into a war, I'd been asking the wrong question. I kept asking what I wanted to do to my mother. The right question was what I owed my grandmother. Because Eleanor's real wish wasn't for me to be enriched, and it certainly wasn't for me to burn her family down over her ashes. Her real wish was in that card and on that dock, and in every even-handed line of the original trust. She wanted the lake kept for all of us. She wanted her granddaughters whole. She wanted, more than anything, for the love she'd finally learned to give to outlive the fear she'd been raised in. If I took the maximum road, I'd get justice for myself and betray her at the same time. If I restored her true wishes instead of avenging my own wounds, I'd be honoring the one person in this family who'd never once made me feel like a spare part. The choice stopped being about my mother at all. It became about which woman I was going to serve. And when I put it that way, it wasn't close. Once I knew what I was going to do, I did it the way I do everything that matters, in the open, with no tricks, because the whole point was to be the opposite of the woman I was up against. My mother's power had always lived in the shadows, the private manipulations, the story planted here and whispered there, the pen slid across a table to an unsuspecting daughter. I wasn't going to beat her at that. I was going to do the reverse. I had Renata prepare a clean, complete package, everything documented and legitimate, and I looped in Paula as the trust's co-agent so there'd be an honest authority in the room who wasn't me. Then I did the thing that separated my road from Marlene's completely. I texted my mother, in advance, exactly what was coming. No ambush, no public trap sprung on an unsuspecting victim, which was her signature move, not mine. I told her plainly that I had obtained the full trust file, the accounting, and my grandmother's medical records, that I intended to address it at the memorial brunch in front of the family, and that she should come prepared to talk. Transparency, all the way down. Let her see the shape of it before it arrived. Her reply came fast, and it was pure Marlene, a single cold line designed to reframe me as the problem. You always did like an audience. I read it twice, and something in me almost laughed. Because of the two of us, only one had ever rehearsed a cruelty in a parked car for maximum effect in front of a crowd. Only one of us had built a whole family's beliefs like a stage set. She thought she was accusing me. She was describing herself. I put the phone down and got ready. Before I tell you what happened at that brunch, I have to say something to you directly, because I know some of you. A part of you is already braced for me to walk in there and blow it all up, to drop the folder like a bomb and watch my mother burn. I understand that hunger completely. That's exactly what I wanted too, for most of my life. Stay with me for what I did instead, because it surprised even me. And subscribe, so the next woman who needs to hear this finds her way here too. Now. The morning of the brunch, Paula's house was full of my family. The same choir from the living room plus the men, plus Whitney pale and quiet by the window, plus Cole and his new wife, plus my niece Nora in a yellow dress, 12 years old and watching everything the way I used to watch everything. Eleanor's ashes sat in a simple urn on the mantel, waiting for the lake. My mother stood near the kitchen in a cream sweater, holding a mimosa, already performing serenity for her audience. I had my key fob in my coat pocket, that dumb little piece of plastic warm from my hand, and I had the folder under my arm, the one holding every fact I'd spent 2 weeks assembling, the one that could, depending on which page I chose to lead with, either restore a family or end one. I stepped into the middle of that bright, crowded room. Conversations trailed off. Forks paused over plates. Every face I'd grown up performing for turned toward me at once. And I opened my mouth to do the thing I'd finally decided to do. My mother struck first because she always struck first. She set down her mimosa, gave the room her most wounded smile, and said, "Everyone, I'm sorry. My daughter's come all this way to make a scene at her own grandmother's memorial. She's been gone 5 years, and this is how she chooses to come back. Over money." A few relatives shifted, ready to believe her, because believing her was a habit 30 years deep. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I set the folder on the dining table, and I did not raise my voice. Not once, the entire time. "I'm not here about money," I said. "I have plenty of my own. I'm here about a document." I opened the folder. I laid out the original trust first, and I told them what Grandma had actually wanted in her own sound mind years ago. The estate split evenly between her granddaughters. The lake house kept for both of us, for all of us, forever. Then I laid the amendment beside it, the one that erased me, enriched Whitney, and reimbursed my mother. And I read them the one sentence, "Having estranged herself, shall take nothing." I watched it land. Then I laid down the hospital records. I read them the nurse's notes from the day of the signature. Confused, not oriented, unable to recall family members, sedated. I laid down Denise's accounting, the steady climb of money out of Eleanor's accounts and into Marlene's during the exact years her mind was failing. And I laid down the last thing, my grandmother's birthday card, the wobbling hand, and I read it out loud, because they needed to hear her voice under all the legal paper. "The lake is yours too, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you different." The room had gone completely still. My mother's face had drained of its serenity, and she started to talk, fast. "That's not, you don't understand." She wanted, but for the first time in her life she had no story, because the documents were telling the only story now, and she couldn't get in front of them. Then I told them what I could do. I told them, evenly, that the timeline of that signature was enough to void the amendment in court, and that the pattern of transfers was enough to open a criminal case for elder financial abuse, one that would put my mother in front of a prosecutor and pull my sister in as a witness. I let every person in that room understand, fully, that I was holding a match over all of it. And then I put the match down. "I'm not going to do that," I said. "Not because she deserves mercy, because Grandma deserves better than to have her memorial turned into a trial." I laid out the settlement instead. The amendment would be withdrawn. The original trust restored. The lake house kept for all the grandchildren, exactly as Eleanor wanted. My own share, the one just restored to me, I was placing into a fund in my grandmother's name for memory care, because I didn't need it, and she'd have loved it. Marlene would quietly return what she'd taken. No police, no headlines. One condition. The truth gets said here. Once. In front of the people who heard the other version. Then I looked at my mother, and I gave up the last thing. "I'm not doing this to be your daughter again," I said. "I'm doing it so Grandma's wish wins. After today, I won't be calling." And the look on her face when she realized I'd stopped needing her to see me at all was better than any apology she was never going to give. The amendment was withdrawn within a month, quietly, exactly as I'd laid out. Renata handled the paperwork, The original trust snapped back into force, and the lake house went back to being what my grandmother always meant it to be, a place all of us could return to. The Eleanor Voss Memory Care Fund exists now. I seeded it with the share I'd fought for and never kept a dollar of, and it pays for respite care for families watching a parent disappear the way we watched her. Marlene returned what she'd taken. She also kept her version of events with a few of the older relatives, the ones who needed her to be right. And I let them. I'd stopped trying to win the choir. The social weather that made her doesn't vanish because one daughter names it. It just loses its grip on that daughter. Whitney called me a week later, crying, and said thank you, and then said something harder, that she was starting to see the story she'd been raised inside and wanted out of it. We're not fixed, but we're talking, which we weren't. The best moment came at the lake, when we scattered Grandma's ashes off the green dock. Little Nora, 12 and sharp-eyed, slipped her hand into mine and asked me about my company. Real questions. How did you start it? Weren't you scared? I told her the truth, that I started with a mop and a Friday I needed to cover, and that being scared and doing it anyway is most of the secret. She looked at me like I was someone worth watching, and I understood that whatever else I'd done, I'd shown one girl in this family that a woman can build her own worth and doesn't have to wait to be handed it. Driving out of that town for the last time, I had my key fob in my hand, and I noticed it had become just a key again. Not a trophy, not a weapon, not proof I flew across a table to make my mother flinch. Just the key to a car I'd earned, taking me back to a life that was mine, that had always been mine, that had never actually been on trial. It turns out the look on her face was never going to fix me, but the day I stopped needing it, I was finally free. That's my story. 5 years of silence, one cruel little question at a wedding, rehearsed in a parked car, and a folder that finally told the truth my grandmother always meant, in her own wobbling hand. If your family ever wrote you out of the story, quietly, and got everyone to sing along, then hear me on this. Your worth was never on trial. You don't have to win them back to be free. You just have to stop asking them to see you, draw the boundary, keep the receipts. And if this reached you tonight, share it with a woman who needs to hear it too. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.